signal now for when I'm needed. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning to them.
Yes, sir. Welcome to Beyond the Bat Signal. I'm your host, Dominic Yanika. Join me as we dive into the depths of Batman's lore, dissecting the Rogues Gallery, and uncovering the stories of our iconic vigilante known as the Dark Knight. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of a, darker discussion. And it is something that is, I find, so compelling, and it's a character just like how Gotham City is a character. I feel like this is its own little character within the Batman mythos, and I don't even think I can cover the entire history, especially not in one episode, but I'm talking about none other than Arkham Asylum. And there's something about Arkham Asylum, not the game. I love the game, but however, that's kind of part of it. But yes, the asylum itself that I feel so drawn to and want to learn more about. Like watching videos, listening, reading about it. Kind of random. So I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And when taking in university, there was a couple of courses where it was studying architecture and then even diving into the history of certain things. One of them was actually called an asylum. I got to find out the exact name, but if you're from Toronto, then you know exactly the street I'm about to mention. It's in the heart of downtown Toronto, but it's on Queen Street. And what they would call it, you know what's driving me nuts? Let me do a quick search. And as I say, mumbo jumbo while looking. Here it is. It was called the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, and it then was renamed the Asylum for the Insane in 1871. So this is a hospital for the insane. That was what it was renamed in 1905, and simply Ontario Hospital, Toronto in 1919. Listen. And it's almost like, well, what falls under that category? I'm not going to necessarily focus on Toronto itself. I want to focus on Gotham City and Arkham and what makes it so unique and why I guess it's very different from anything else that we see in comics. Like, you know, not to bring up the Snyderverse, but like there was one movie that I would have loved to have seen, and it was something that Ben Affleck was writing, and he was going to be entering the Arkham Asylum and to take on Deathstroke, and it seemed like he was just going to go. It was going to go through different levels, but the setting was going to take place in Arkham, and I can only imagine through comics and video games as to how incredible this movie would have looked. And, you know, and what could have been, especially for a film that would have taken place in an asylum. And just like, you know, I feel like the setting itself would have completely been a character and a big character in that movie. But yeah, so today's topic is the madness around Arkham Asylum. And what is it that, I guess there's history behind it, but it's not only just history, but like there's lore. So here I am doing a lot of reading, a lot of video watching, and I want to share this information because I feel like, heck, if I have interest in it, then maybe one of you might have interest in it, and maybe you might find this entertaining. Listen, I don't know. I hope you do. If not, give me some feedback. But before we get into today's episode, if you could please leave a 5-star review and write something. It's on Apple Podcasts by all means, or on Spotify where I know a lot of you do listen. Even if you want, follow along on X/Twitter at Beyond Bat Signal, and shoot me an email if you have any questions. beyondthebatsignal@gmail.com. I have there's actually going to be like quite a few things coming up that I am really excited about, especially the next episode. And speaking of episodes, there's not going to be a review on Batman The Last Halloween because that issue number 5, does not come out until I think it's February 26th. So, I'm definitely looking forward to it. The wait is killing me. But listen, things that are good are worth waiting for. Oh yeah, we're going there. Real cheesy. Now, with that being said, let's get into the history behind how the name of Arkham Asylum kind of just came to be. So, as I've said, Arkham is not just a building. Like, at least not to me. I don't know about you, but it's definitely a character. Like, just like Gotham City. It basically, when I look at it, it reflects the madness as to what goes on in there. And there's no better comic book than Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth, written by Grant Morrison, the brilliant Grant Morrison. But anyway, and they have a wide array of Batman's rogues gallery. So, and you know, all of them very intriguing. There's a reason why we find his rogues gallery probably the most compelling villains across any comic book character. But it's haunted, and people feel like, I feel like they like that sense of horror, especially with Batman. Very different from any other DC superhero or Marvel in that case. But it's a haunted origin story. There's always a revolving door as to like which criminal's going in or escaping, because it seems like they escape so easily. And the first thing that comes to mind was Joker from Batman the Animated Series, just escaping with a Christmas tree. Anyway, but yeah, we're going to explore everything that Gotham has to offer. And yeah, so I guess we'll start from the beginning. So the history behind it. So Arkham Asylum, officially known as Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the Criminally Insane, was first introduced in comic Batman number 258. However, it wasn't called Arkham Asylum. It was called Arkham Hospital. And sorry, I should reiterate. Batman number 258, released in 1974, created by Dennis O'Neil, and quickly became a staple in Batman's world, as we can clearly see. I mean, there's a game based on it, and its roots run way deeper, in my opinion, than in the comics itself. I feel like a lot of people know exactly what Arkham Asylum is. It's in Batman's lore, and it's just become such an integral part as to what Batman is all about. And and I don't mean exactly what he's all about, but like, you know, I guess you have Batman, you want Alfred, you want Arkham Asylum as part of his universe, right? Like, even just watching the Penguin and seeing what was going on, I guess, with Sophia Falcone, and just watching her navigate herself through Arkham Asylum just intrigued me, right? And the inmates there. Now, where did this idea come from? So, H.P. Lovecraft, actually. It's called Danvers State Hospital, previously known as Danvers Lunatic Asylum, and it was actually the real world inspiration for Arkham. So if you Google search Danvers State Hospital, people used to say that it would actually kind of look like Arkham Asylum, and I'm Googling it right now, and let's see what we get. I look at this and I'm like, yeah, like, especially there's one under National Park Service. So if you want to pause, do a quick Google search, you look at Danvers State Hospital. This looks to me just like the video game, but to each their own. And I'm curious what you guys think about it. But yeah, so that's where the inspiration came from. But it was not from the Batman writers. It was from H.P. Lovecraft. So for Lovecraft, many of you might remember, I'm not sure, he was the king of unsettling, disturbing storytelling. Very unique storytelling, might I add. And it was widely assumed, although not confirmed, that Danvers State Hospital was a real-world inspiration for Arkham. Okay? Who knows? But you look at the architecture, and listen, it's not just me. There's, I guess, like a lot of evidence out there that just be your own judge. But you look at the architecture, and to me, it looks very similar to what was drawn inspiration from. Now, to look at how this was built, and I'm talking about Danvers State Hospital, there was also underground tunnels, experimental approaches to patient care that was actually common, and mechanical restraints deemed harmful, leaving hundreds of inmates wandered. So this is where hundreds of inmates just kind of wandered freely in a facility. And again, this was not only that, but it also was a clinical school that was added, seeing an influx in mentally ill children joining the population. So can you imagine this hospital with people just walking freely and need a lot of attention? Okay, so there was actually some unique and inhumane practices that I have to share. Shock therapy. If you're not sure what shock therapy is, just go watch The Penguin and see what Sophia Falcone had to go through to help manage the inmates, as well as accounts for they were in straitjackets. First image that comes to mind is Kevin Conroy's Batman in a straitjacket. I don't know. And radical drug therapies. So when these practices came to light and brought to, I guess, when it came to light in the 1960s, the population of the hospital decreased because they're like, listen, we thought that they were going to be treated. I mean, I'm assuming that's why parents and family members brought these people to the hospital, right? And it was to be treated. And they saw a decreased population and eventually shut down. And I mean, listen, they're highlighting Massachusetts, but this happened. I know I brought up Toronto. It happened everywhere. But that was the inspiration for, and I'm assuming this is where Daniel Neal kind of got it. But talk about a quintessential horror setting, right? I mean, you're thinking of they call it an insane asylum for the sick. And, you read about what Ben Affleck was writing, and I'm like, man, that's just unsettling. It's something where I'm like, I feel like I'm on the edge of my seat, but I'm like eating popcorn fast, and it's like, what's going to happen? And I'm ready for a jump scare. But yeah, and if you kind of Google search some of these asylums, they were deteriorating, they were dirty, they were filthy, very much Arkham feel. Now, should share that there was a novel called Project 17 and a movie called Session 9. So if you want to focus on something where it's like an asylum where there's stories that discuss this, Project 17, the novel, and movie called Session 9, worth watching. Now, with that being said, let's go back to Denny O'Neil and Irv Novak, who basically named Arkham Hospital, and then they kind of went back and forth. So it was Arkham Hospital, and then went to Sanatorium, back to Asylum, and they kind of went back and forth, and then they finally settled on the latter, calling it Arkham Asylum. So one thing was its location, has been inconsistent within the Batman mythos, being described as being deep into the Gotham suburbs, and then on the outskirts of the city of Gotham, and on the peninsula, and outside of Gotham City, and then it's just being isolated on a small island accessed by a road bridge, which I kind of like personally. But now, within the lore, there's inconsistencies, obviously, but I'm not sure if that can be accredited to how many times Arkham Asylum has been destroyed, blown up, and then rebuilt over the decades. So, I don't know. But let's get into one of the main origins of Arkham Asylum, and I'm talking about how, I guess, you kind of look back at the history and it's like, well, who created it? And I'm not talking about Dennis O'Neil who wrote it. I'm talking about like the character within the Batman mythos that created it. And I'm talking about Amadeus Arkham. So he is a man whose own tragedy and descent into madness, and you can really get a good grasp of that in Arkham Asylum, Serious House on Serious Earth. So his own tragedy and descent into madness is basically what kind of helped shape this institution after the brutal murders of his wife and daughter. Amadeus vowed to create a place to treat Gotham's mentally ill criminals. Ironically, he later became one of the inmates, which is very ironic. But it was also named after Elizabeth Arkham Asylum. So it was his mom who was mentally ill, and eventually she was unwell and eventually euthanized. So although in the comic it made it appear that she committed suicide, but it wasn't the case. Now, with that said, in the hospital, his family was actually murdered by a serial killer named Mad Dog. So Mad Dog was incarcerated at the asylum, and then Arkham, and I'm talking about Amadeus Arkham, treated him personally until months later, where Mad Dog would actually Mad Dog was actually accidentally, and I'm using air quotes here, electrocuted during a routine electric shock therapy. So Arkham then would descend into this madness. I should mention, though, Martin Mad Dog Hawkins. So he was the one who murdered Amadeus Arkham's wife and daughter. Obviously, he was a deranged criminal, and he became one of Arkham Asylum's patients. Now, this tragedy also shattered Amadeus's mind, where he continued to run the asylum, but then became obsessed with Mad Dog Hawkins, viewing him as a manifestation of the darkness that his mother was the one who feared. And Amadeus eventually murdered Hawkins, luring him into a padded cell, and then just basically said, listen, you're going to starve to death, and just left him there. Because Amadeus was believing that it was necessary. It was a necessary act to purge evil. And then, as Amadeus's mental state actually deteriorated, he began to hear voices and claim that the asylum was the one who it itself was speaking to him, urging him to cleanse the building of its darkness. So Amadeus became paranoid. There was delusions, and he grew. His delusions grew until he was basically confined into the asylum as a patient himself, completing the very tragic transformation of his life. Right, and it is a sad story, but it's a story that kind of mirrors what Arkham Asylum kind of is. It's exploring what trauma is, and there's a lot of mental illness, and there's blurred lines between the victims, right, and what their backstory is and how it led them to it. So his actions, obviously, and his descent into madness reflected, I guess, the nature of the insanity within Arkham Asylum, which remains a physical and symbolic monument to Amadeus' broken psyche and many other inmates as well. So when I hear all this and I'm reading through how, you know, people who have gone quote unquote insane or in my opinion, ill, and you just hear the madness in how I interpret Arkham Asylum. The biggest influence for me would be the video games. And it's almost just like, for me, it's like going into hell. But the visual and the atmosphere. So visually, Arkham has always been depicted as decaying. It's very gothic. It's almost like it just feels like it hasn't been cleaned in, I don't know, 20 years. It feels like the light fixtures are just off, and it's just, I don't know, fluorescent lighting, and it's blinking. That's just what I get. You touch the floor, it's almost like, I'm not sure if you ever step into like a gym shower, and it kind of feels like barefoot, and I mean barefoot, where it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like your own shower floor. It feels filthy. That's exactly what I kind of envision. And it's crumbling architecture, like it hasn't been touched in decades, and it needs a lot of money to be inputted in. But yeah, and then there's like a lot of shadows. It just seems to have a vibe of its own, like completely different from anything else within the Gotham universe. But it's a place that still feels alive, but not in a good way. And it's not in a comforting way by any means. So, I look at Arkham within the Nolanverse, and I love what Chris Nolan did. And please don't take this as a knock, but one of the, I guess, what I'm about to do is just be, I guess I am being critical, but I didn't get that vibe that Arkham Asylum, that, like, I just didn't get that vibe of what Arkham actually was. Like, I looked at, especially in Batman Begins, like, I saw Arkham, but it felt too clean and posh. That's just me, right? Now, there are so many inmates that Arkham has, which again makes it so compelling as to what did people do. I mean, there's a lore about it, and people are drawn to it. But one of the main reasons is the residents, the people who are in Arkham. And Arkham Asylum would not be them without its patients. It's like Batman. Like, Batman is who he is, but his rogues gallery really propel him to make that much more of a compelling character. But yeah, Gotham's rogues gallery are legendary, and each villain reflects a different piece of Batman's psyche and the darkness that lives within Arkham. And there's no doubt, like, it's haunted within that universe. I mean, I mentioned Joker, who it's almost like that's like his home, right? Arkham Asylum is his home. And we can't start without mentioning the Joker is probably Arkham's most infamous resident. He escapes so frequently. You can tell that the security is just, less than stellar. And they've almost become part of the institution's routine. Joker comes in, Joker gets out. Joker runs the asylum. And there's so many good stories with Joker running the asylum. Clearly, the one by Grant Morrison is one that just sticks to me. And it's weird because that comic, as I've gotten older, I've become more fond of. Anyway, but Joker treats Arkham a lot less like a prison and more like a backstage area for his act, right? Like, I'm going back to the video game where Joker's like, he's trapped, he's arrested, he gets dropped off, and then he's running the nut house. That's what I picture. Exactly it. Harleen Quinzel is another where, when I say Harleen Quinzel, this was Dr. Harleen Quinzel, psychiatrist who was treating the Joker and then fell in love with him. I guess that's tragic tale, in my opinion. But her descent into madness when she wanted to be a healer and then became an inmate in Arkham Asylum is a wild story to me. And I bring up Arkham Shadow, the video game, where the storytellers for that video game were brilliant. Like, they gave a real good backstory to Harley Quinn that we've never really seen in video games or on television or movies. Really, like they went pretty in depth. I mean, we've seen it in comics, but here they just nailed Harleen Quinzel and turning into Harley Quinn. Very fascinating, and I get why fans are very drawn to her character. Then we have Scarecrow, or Dr. Jonathan Crane. So this guy obsessed with fear. Him and his fear toxin. Again, something where if you watch Batman Begins or even the animated series or the Arkham video games, it's that element of horror that he brings. And Arkham is just basically a testing ground for his fear toxin. So turning this asylum into a house of horrors, so to speak. So, and then, you have the Arkham video games where he has his nightmare sequences all within Arkham Asylum. And it was basically like tests for Batman. And I can't tell you how many times I played that video game at nighttime, lights off, and I was freaked out by it. Then you have Two-Face, where, for him, and I'm talking about Two-Face alone, the way he's depicted within Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum, where he's just more than a Two-Face. But anyway, Arkham, he had a struggle with duality, right? Where as Victor Zsasz was basically just obsessed with just marking his kills constantly and then just cutting himself just to mark. It's like another trophy. So again, like there's other inmates, but Two-Face and beyond, where they have a unique place within Arkham Asylum. And you look at the one by Grant Morrison where Two-Face can't even make a decision anymore. Like, he can do heads, tails, but it's more than that now. He can't even do that anymore. And it's to the point where he was struggling to make a decision that he peed himself, right? But yeah, and then you have obviously guys like the Ventriloquist and Scarface, Poison Ivy. Like, do guys like Bane, do they belong in Arkham Asylum? No, I don't think so. Guys like Carmine Falcone, no. Salvatore Maroni, no. Mad Hatter, I don't know. I would say yes. But any of those mobster guys, definitely not. I just think that they don't belong within Arkham Asylum. But with that said, Arkham's also had an impact. So let's get into this segment of the impact that Arkham has had on Batman and Gotham. So, what does Arkham in general represent to the larger Batman universe? It's not just a holding cell for villains. It's a symbol. I keep hearing Bruce Wayne's voice. It's a symbol. But it's a symbol for basically Gotham's failure, is it not? Right? Like, you look at all these inmates and how they're treated. And is it not just a reflection as to how Gotham City itself is treating the people that need extra attention and they're not? Right? And then there's this challenge to Batman where he's got to go out and catch him again, and then they go back into the asylum where they're not going to be treated. Right? It's the insane that's running the nut house. But it's a vicious cycle, especially for Batman, where Arkham's like a revolving door. One bad guy comes in, another bad guy goes out. Villains escape, they leave, they come back in. And it's just, they commit crimes. Like, they're ill. And obviously for Batman, it's him. He's got a job on a nightly basis. And, here is an asylum that's dirty. People don't want to obviously work there. And it's very corrupt. So is Batman going to ever be able to stop the madness? Like, we put people in jail to keep the streets clean, and here's the asylum where people are just able to kind of do what they want. And there's no order. I don't know. Now, psychologically, Arkham kind of forces Batman to confront his own psyche in a way. I mean, that there's a lot that's going on within Bruce Wayne's mind. But especially in stories like Arkham Asylum, Serious House on Serious Earth, where we see how thin the line is between Batman and the criminals he fights. Like, going, and I think Grant Morrison has since said, like, that's just a dream sequence that Batman had. But, like, him, and I mean him by Batman, going in, did that change him? Or, like, because I feel like he was never the same, like, in the sense of, like, that Batman in that story, he walked out and it was like a horror story for him, but he was brave and was just telling Jim Gordon, like, no, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure, take him out, take Joker out, obviously alive, but he wasn't sure that Batman was going to come out alive, right? Now, does this change Batman, or does Batman kind of change Arkham, right? Like, and then there's always that argument, like, did Batman create the villains he faces? Like, I personally don't think so. But I don't know. It's kind of an interesting question, right? Like a psychological reflection onto, like, Batman and his own psyche and how he has to confront it with very different forms, basically addressing psychotics, right? Someone like Joker, who's a psychopath, and then someone like Dr. Jonathan Crane, or another person like Doctor Strange, who is instrumental in being a driving force to these villains, right? And it's like, well, what does go on here? Like, what process are you running? And obviously it's not healthy, and I don't know. But with that said, I mean, let's move on to the next part where, I mean, the feeling within Arkham Asylum feels very, like, gothic and horrorish, but also has a nice crime noir that, again, the setting, it's not going to be prim and proper, it's not going to be posh, but yet I love it like that. I like it very grim, right? That's how Arkham Asylum should be, right? It kind of blends that grittiness, the realism, and it has where it takes place in the psychological horror, and then it creates something, one of Batman's most compelling stories. Like, there's quite a few. Batman, The Last Arkham, and then actually there's another one that I was just looking up that I want to read. It's called Arkham Asylum Living Hell. So, just a side note, I'll just read this out loud. Arkham Asylum Living Hell examines the dark underbelly of Gotham's notorious House of Madness. Wearing white, one of Gotham's most successful financiers, thought it could be his jail rat by pleading insanity. But now he's finding out why you don't cop an insanity plea in Gotham. Expect appearances by Batman, the Joker, Two-Face, Poison Ivy, yada, yada, yada. Now, again, you look at something like this and I'm like, man, this is a story that just I'm compelled to read. So right now I'm reading Gotham City Year 1. And I think next I'm going to take that read on, and, it should be fun. Got to be doing the work, as Peter R. Vera says. So it's very clear that Arkham Asylum is so popular amongst all of us Batman fans, right? So, I mean, but what is it? I mean, it's the look. There is also, I guess, another thing is, when people are in a mental institution, I think it's something that's very vague to us. We don't know a lot about, but it intrigues us. And I don't mean that in a sickening or condescending way. I mean, like, we watch actually movies about this. There's documentaries on it. But it seems to have struck a chord with the audience, because it's obviously a mainstay within Batman lore. But it wasn't until the 1980s where, like, these Arkham stories were started to get fleshed out. And I know Grant Morrison went did a deep dive. And then you look at the Arkham Asylum video game where they have the tapes of Amadeus Arkham, I think Jeremiah Arkham, I'm not sure. And they go deep, and it's like we don't see these characters, but we hear the tapes. And that's one thing I'd love to do, is just go on YouTube and just listen and have someone break down each tape for me. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about if you've played the game. Very interesting in itself. Like, you could spend a good hour just listening to some of these tapes and the inmate discussions. It's brilliant. But it's definitely become a perfect setting for those stories. Like, and it adds a lot of intrigue, murder. There's a lot of insanity and supernatural stuff that I think fans enjoy. Through a narrative perspective, I mean, like, the setting has clearly worked, especially for writers. I mean, we all went nuts when we saw Joker Folia do, and all he was doing was dancing on top of a building with Lady Gaga's Harley Quinn, and we saw Arkham all lit up. Like, we're like, wow, that looks just so beautiful, right? And we were like, okay, well, what stories can come about there? And I'd say, there's quite a few stories that occur within Arkham Asylum that I can't wait to hear get fleshed out, especially through Matt Reeves. You got Joker in there, you got the Riddler, and who knows what else is going to go on. And I'd love for it to be fleshed out. Like, I'm praying to God that they have an Arkham Asylum TV series, exactly like how the Penguin was. I think it'd be a hit, me personally, especially if Reeves is on it. Maybe even Lauren LaFranc, who knows? But it does, like, with Arkham Asylum and its stories, like, you give people, like, writers to kind of flesh out certain stories that take place in Arkham Asylum. It kind of fills in those gaps for the villains that Batman kind of rounds up and then dumps them into Arkham Asylum. It gives them a place where, like, you can have Joker, Two-Face, and Riddler interact and see how, you throw them in a room and see what happens. To me, it's interesting. I love it. They're very colorful, right? And all so unique. And it kind of gives a story within a certain setting, which I kind of like. I don't know. Also, Arkham being so popular is for psychological horror. So, again, I read Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth for the first time, and I remember thinking, and this was years ago, and I was like, the art sucks. I hate it. And what did I just read? And then I read it 2 years ago. And I'm like, man, like, this is incredible. What changed? And I think as I got older, the more intrigue I got. I was like, what's the deeper meaning? And questions as to why and how. And what was going on? What was going on within Grant Morrison's mind when he wrote this, right? But there's such a lore within it. And obviously you got to be like, I don't know, like just to get into that mindset. But there's such a concept, and it's very, I don't know, you look at Arkham Asylum, the video game, where like they had an entire game built within that setting of the Arkham grounds, and probably arguably one of the best Batman video games ever created, but there's quite a few comics. I've mentioned Serious House on Serious Earth, The Last Arkham, Living Hell was another one that I can't wait to read. But these are perfect settings to kind of flesh out certain villain stories, right? And I don't know. It's a little wonder as to why it is frequently revisited for deeper explorations, right? Like for me, especially diving deeper into the villains, which are so compelling, into the character psyches and what makes them so effective and what makes, I don't know, even Batman within that setting is very intriguing. But what's your take? Pretty curious. Give me some feedback. What do you think, how you feel about Arkham Asylum? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it necessary? Is it a character within Batman's lore and mythos that you feel like going forward, it's an absolute must-have for any movie, any TV show. I don't know. There's something about it that I just love, and I'm like, man, like, could they create movies where they have an asylum and see what goes on in there? Like Shutter Island was such a good movie. Anyway, I think that we're gonna just wind down. I think that's it. So feel free to follow along on X/Twitter at Beyond Bat Signal. Shoot me an email, beyondthebatsignal@gmail.com. Got a couple of fun episodes coming up. And I want to share news, but I can't. But I will in the coming episodes. So follow along and rate and review the show. Helps spread the word and helps. It really does go a long way for the show. To leave a rating and just drop say a few words. But with that being said, my name's Dominic. This is Beyond the Bat Signal, and we're signing off.